From the Homestead Studios in Santa Clarita, California, it's just the Tip-Sters with Melissa Morgan.
Hashtag Carol's innocent.
If you got a tip for Melissa, a fact about a murder case that you never hear anyone talk about, a rumor that really isn't a rumor because you know it's true, the real dirt on Mr. Clean, tell us about it by calling the Tipster hotline at 832-TIPSTER. That's 832-847-7837, or send an email to jttipsters@gmail.com. You just might hear your tip on the podcast. And now here's your host, ensuring social distancing by carrying an open bottle of Charlie by Revlon with her wherever she goes, Melissa Morgan.
More cowbell. Mark is perhaps combing the memory banks of his mind where I mentioned I had a bottle of Charlie that went bad.
No, I don't remember that.
Oh, you don't?
No, I just remember how I just hated the way that stuff
shit.
smelled.
Yeah, I was 13 or 14.
Yeah.
And that was the big deal, right? Because I think it was Cheryl Teague's
Charlie.
Call it Charlie.
There's a famous jazz singer.
Yeah, that jazz, Bobby Little, not
Yes.
Bobby Little, Bobby Short,
Bobby Short, right.
Yeah, Bobby Little. Good job, Melissa. At least it was close.
Bobby Tiny.
Short.
It was Bobby Tiny.
Bobby Little Man.
Yeah.
Bobby Short was playing the piano like on a street in New York, like I think on a truck or something.
Yeah, I don't
and Cheryl
know.
Teagues is like jauntily walking down the street with her like her Mary Tyler Moore hat.
I know. It was very Mary Tyler Moore.
It was very, very.
Only with a very famous, highly paid, I'm assuming, jazz singer.
He was also, I think, the companion of Gloria Vanderbilt.
No kidding.
No kidding. Which was,
Whoa.
I know, which was interesting because she had her own scent. But yeah, he was the her own Gloria. It was, I think, just called Vanderbilt or something.
Okay.
But yeah, Charlie, I think it was by Coty, 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 that made like Love's Baby Salt and shit like that.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, Charlie was awful, and I had a bottle of it that went bad on my dresser one year.
Oh.
And I went to spray it, and I was like, "Oh my god!" It brought me to my knees.
How could it possibly go bad when it was already so
Alcohol.
awful?
Yeah.
Oh.
It was already so awful. Okay, I'm going to cough.
I mean, when I was in
You made me cough. I laughed so hard.
when I was in high school, all the girls wore that shit.
No
and
shit?
It smelled awful.
Oh, it did already. But when it goes bad, it turns like a darker amber color.
Oh no.
And then it was chemical. It brought me to my knees. It was like it's like a combination of like napalm and blue cheese or something. I don't even know how to describe it.
That's pretty descriptive.
It was bad.
Wow.
It was, as I like to say,
Holy
BADD. It's so bad there's two Ds.
Oh my god.
So yeah, it was bad.
All right.
We hope that you're sheltering in place or whatever it's fucking called, social distancing. I can't even talk about it anymore. But and I don't really want to talk about the Tiger King because it's so awful. But I do want to say, hey out there, all you cool cats and kittens.
Oh my god.
Carol's innocent. Hashtag Carol's innocent. Okay, moving on, saying nothing else. All right, so.
Just so you know, I don't think she's innocent.
Oh, I don't give a shit what you think, buddy. Can you prove to me she's guilty?
No.
Okay. It just, these rumors started because of a terrible, petty issue. And I get it. Joe Exotic is pissed off. And Doc Antle and all the other stupid assholes who collect animals that shouldn't be collected are pissed off at her because she, didn't want them to do that. And, and you can say, but she was doing the same thing.
She was.
Well, but, when you have like memorial plaques for the animals and graves for them and you remember each birth date and that's different than,
come on.
I might have fed them to my staff, or I might have just, in the world of Doc Antle, the rumor is that ex-workers said he just like incinerated them if they got too big and they weren't cute anymore, if they didn't serve his purpose. Mm-hmm. So I don't think there's any, I'll just say that, how about if I say this across the board? I don't think anyone's really innocent here.
Well, we agree with that. Every single human being in that documentary is a horrible person.
Yeah, there's
Every
that.
Single
That's it. That's all you
person.
need to say. So let's just stop there. Okay.
Still really fun to watch.
It is fun it's fascinating because, when you mentioned Mr. Clean, which you and I had a discussion earlier, Mr. Clean has bothered me since I was a child. And I think because he was like this big, upside down triangle shaped guy with like big shoulders and a small waist, like an odd shaved head, gold earring wearing, semi-gay, weightlifting, incarcerated
inmate,
pervert. Yeah, something. He did look like he should have been in jail, not particularly on cleaning products. But let me tell you what, those fucking Mr. Clean sponges, God damn those things.
Oh, I know you love those
They'll
things.
erase your sins from Jesus. I mean,
Really?
I get streaks off the wall, off the paint. The thing is, if you have like real delicate paint, don't push too hard because it'll actually scrape the paint off.
I've never used one. They scare me.
They are magnificent.
I guess I'll have to start trying them.
Yeah.
Right.
They're pretty fucking cool. So hi, Siren. Is there a neighbor or a leaf? Yeah, so I didn't want to, put her in her crate. I wanted her to roam free, and then that was probably my first mistake.
Yeah, there may be a change of plans.
There may,
on
yeah.
that
We're just going to let her roam free.
Podcast ends
yeah,
today.
we're roam free with all her toys that I left for her to play with. Anywho, this episode is going to be one of my favorites before we start, only because the story is horrific and it's still going on and it is now getting a lot of attention, but the reason it will be a favorite is because of how it arrived to me a little over a month ago from an amazing tipster named Tammy. And she lived in the Fort Worth area when this case happened. And she had gone to the same high school as the victim. I believe that she is younger, but I think it influenced things from then on. When this event happened, it influenced the way parents let their kids go out, or curfews, lots of things, which I'll explain. But it just is such a gift to me when a listener trusts me to cover a case. I love finding cases on my own. It's a joy of mine. But when someone trusts me enough to have me cover a case that is so important to them, and I'll explain why and how it's so important to Tipster Tammy, it means the world to me. And not only that, we have a contest where you have one more week where you can get a fantastic 20-ounce stainless steel tumbler from our friend Shelly at southerngirlcreations.net.
Oh, and it came in, too.
Oh, and
I've seen it.
It's exquisite.
It's magnificent.
It really is.
Why are we giving this away?
I know. I really wanted to keep it.
You're too generous.
Because our tipsters are better people than we are. That's why they're getting it. So it's got our logo on one side, and it's got crime scene tape and what looks like some fantastic, maybe bleeding bullet holes, on the other side with the crime scene tape. It's really pretty spectacular, and Shelly did a magnificent job. So we have that, and we have a $25 Ulta gift card, which you can use to buy all of the hand soap that you want. And along with that, we have until, I do have to mention something else, but you have until Friday, midnight, April 10th to get your case suggestions in, and we will do a drawing. And you can either email us at jttipsters@gmail.com, or you can call and leave your case suggestion at 832-847-7837, the Tipster hotline. And if you win, we will, want to get a mailing address from you, so you can leave that in the email or in the phone call if you are comfortable doing that.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Can our winner purchase Charlie at Ulta?
No, I don't think they make it anymore. If they do, I wouldn't suggest buying it because by now it would have had to have gone bad.
Right.
And you do not want to smell like napalm and blue cheese. That is not a sexy scent, no matter what Cheryl Tiegs tells you.
If that is a sexy scent to you,
if you like napalm and blue cheese,
I don't want to know you.
By all means, buy up all the Charlie with your Ulta gift card. And here's something you also can't get at Ulta, but I just have to say thank you to tipster Kyla, who I was feeling sorry for myself this week, and a box shows up on our front porch, and it is from Bath & Body Works. And I was like, what did I order from there? I don't even remember ordering anything, but I'm doing a lot of like nighttime online ordering now when I'm not sleeping. And I'm sitting here smelling it right now. I'm not sure you can smell it in production headquarters, producer Mark, because you have your door shut. But it is a unicorn candle that has some lemon essential oil in it.
Yeah,
and
I did smell it.
It smells so good.
It does.
And some fantastic foaming hand wash, and it's called Unicorn Milkshake. So Tipster Kyla is just the sweetest, most adorable gift fairy. And I can't thank my beautiful Tip-Sters enough for being so amazing to me. It just arrived on the perfect day. I was just like, wee, like feeling sorry for myself being, trapped in our house, which we have a great house. It's not like it's not like we're in, a gulag. It's just, it's that feeling of being trapped. You son of a bitch. That's what you hear way too often, isn't it?
That's what you sounded like that day.
You shut up. But I probably did. That's what I sounded like. God bless producer Mark and his drops. I miss them so much. So this episode is the case of Carla Jan Walker, and it is heretofore still unsolved. One of the things that I was happy to hear, if you happen to watch the DNA of Murder, the show that Paul Holes hosts on Oxygen Network, is that at the end he said, I feel this is solvable. And that, I know that he is not the be-all and end-all, although I, worship him quite a bit. And I get it. He's a man. He's a human being. He makes mistakes. He fucks up. He apparently has a roving eye, whatever. He's a hottie. I don't care what he does personally. But what I do care about is what he does professionally. And he works his ass off and does a great job. I think producer Mark didn't think the episode was great.
Well, I wasn't going to say anything because I know you love him so much. But
I do, but
I thought this particular.
I agree.
Look. I've seen other episodes of the show,
and they're
great.
They're
good. They're very good. This seems like it was just thrown together.
It did a little.
It was very haphazard. I was very disappointed.
I wouldn't agree with haphazard, but it did feel. I was stunned at what was left out because I kept saying to producer Mark, I've had this case for a month from Tipster Tammy. And it meant so much to her, and I'm going to read part of her email to me to explain why. And there's a lot of information online about this case, and even more so.
Was Siren licking your toes just then?
Or I was trying to explain. She's in our bedroom, I think. I was explaining that there's a lot of information.
I was scared
Did I
there.
frighten you?
Yeah. I was just
Sorry, I didn't mean to do the up and down timber. I was trying to emphasize the fact that there is a fuckload of information about Carla's case.
That I understand.
Even though it's, 45 years old it was 1974. So there is a lot of information. There's probably a lot of speculation and innuendo, but if you can dig through, it's sort of like, I almost said digging through the shit to find the corn. What's wrong with me? Have I literally lost the ability to come up with any other sort of metaphor?
You've become your crazy uncle, fill in the name.
It's like digging through, I didn't want to say a haystack looking for a needle, but it's also a little bit like digging through the shit to find the corn. There's good info there. There's good info if you dig, but there's a buckload of digging to do, a lot of information. And I was shocked that some very important parts of this case were left out of the DNA of Murder. There are also some podcasts that covered it, and I think they did a very in-depth, great job of covering it. Sometimes a host has a voice that is frightening, and I can't get through it, but the information, you can find some podcasts that have covered this. So I was not really wanting to cover this after I got this email from Tipster Tammy, but what I read and what she conveyed made me think, okay, you can do this. And then after seeing, and it happened to be, we were doing it the same weekend that the DNA of Murder covered the story, but he left out, in my opinion, really big pieces of information about the case.
Boy, did he ever.
I really was sort of stunned. And maybe, he doesn't, I think he's probably one of the producers or executive producer, but maybe he doesn't have the final say about what makes it in. And it's only an hour-long show. They probably film a lot and are not able to say everything. But I kept turning to Mark every commercial break and saying, if he doesn't talk about the letter, I'm going to shit. If he doesn't talk about the letter, I'm going to shit.
Yeah. And
he didn't talk about the letter.
This is one of the rare times that I know about the case before the podcast records.
But you still don't know everything.
Well, I know, but when she told me what the letter was, it really is and I don't know why they didn't talk about it. Anyway.
Maybe because the case is so old and is so full of information at this point. There's a million answers to why some pieces of information don't come out in certain pieces of media. But just know I'm going to do the best that I can using the really great information from, the Fort Worth Star-Telegram and from all of these, fantastic, news places that have covered it, from groups on Facebook who get together and want to solve this case because they knew Carla and they know Rodney and they know the family, more importantly, and they want them to have the answers. That's really what this is about. So, way back a month or so or more ago, I get this email from Tipster Tammy, and she said, I've been binging the podcast and I love it, and I want you to consider looking into the kidnapping and murder of a young high school girl 45 years ago. And she said, Carla Walker was murdered in 1974 in Fort Worth, Texas. She attended my high school, Western Hills High School. She explains the situation, and she said it changed all of our lives and compelled me to major in criminal justice in college. And she said, as I'm writing this, I remember how scared we all got and how the thought of parking and making out in cars after that was just completely verboten, but it probably saved us from VD or pregnancy. And then she said, LOL. So this is something that is important to Tammy. And here, 45 years later, it's still influencing her life and her decisions. And that's a pretty big case right there.
That's very big.
I also am always a little thrown off by a woman who was murdered a year before Carla. Similar situation, kidnapped off of her community college campus and found in a culvert. Why Brenda Martin's case didn't get the amount of attention that Carla's. Sometimes I don't understand. Now, I will tell you, this is Texas. Carla Walker is exquisitely beautiful. And I just hate that, I don't want to revert to the white woman syndrome. If you're a young, beautiful white woman, they're going to look for you. Brenda Martin, young, beautiful white woman. So I don't know what the differences are, but why one case captures a community, but it did. Maybe it was the family, maybe it was the time. I don't know. But the story goes, because it's an unusual situation, we have a living witness, her boyfriend. Carla's boyfriend, Rodney, was a year and a half older than her. He was a senior at Western Hills. She was a junior. And while it was February 16th, it was considered the Valentine's Day dance. It was because it was a Saturday night, February 16th, 1974. Carla wears a beautiful blue dress that belonged to her older sister. Carla is very tiny, maybe 5 foot tall, 4'10", 4'11", and the dress had to be made a little shorter to fit her, but it was really beautiful, sleeveless blue dress. Very, very beautiful dress in 1974 for a Valentine's Day dance. She and Rodney had been dating for quite a while. In his estimation, they would have made plans for a future. That's how he was looking at it. She had a promise ring. They had gone to the Western Hills High School Valentine's Day dance. They'd gone out to dinner first. They met up with some friends later, may have had some drinks or some smoking, 1974 issues, and dropped off the other couple. And there weren't a lot of places to go to the bathroom in the area. So they went to the Brunswick Ridgely bowling alley, which apparently they let people use the bathroom. So Carla had used the bathroom, and Rodney was parked in his mom's 1969 LTD in the parking lot. And Carla came back out, and they were in the front seat. They had been talking, and then they started, doing what young couples in love do. And they were lying on the front seat of the car. Carla was, on the bottom, and Rodney was on top. And the passenger side door opened, according to Rodney. And he kept getting hit in the head. And he heard clicking, and he thought he was being shot. But he was being pistol whipped with what was apparently a .22 caliber Ruger. And the only reason we know that is because the magazine was found in the parking lot. I still don't know if there were any bullets in the magazine. And Carla's purse was found in the parking lot. And the offender, according to Rodney, was dragging Carla out of the car. And she was saying, don't hit him, I'll go with you. And he believes that she said this so that he would not be injured in the way that he was being injured. And the last thing he remembered her saying was, "Go get daddy. Go get daddy." So now Mr. Walker, Mr. and Mrs. Walker have these 4 kids, and they are good parents and a tight family, and they all love each other. And Rodney had, in his estimation, been sort of welcomed in as part of the family. He said he knew that things, were going good when Mrs. Walker said, "You don't have to knock, you walk on in." And Mr. Walker was saying, after what happened with Carla, Rodney is a family member. We have a place set at him at our dinner table every night. So, he was really being integrated into the family as Carla's partner. He, at this point, says that he had been unconscious for a while. He doesn't know how long. He drove the car wildly to the Walker home. At one point, he said he was almost involved in a head-on collision. He drove up on the sidewalk and squealed to a stop in the front yard and got out and was screaming, "They've got her, they've got her, they've got her." Now, there's a lot of talk about the word "they," that word indicates multiple offenders. It really doesn't. I'm from Kentucky. I'm not from, California, and I'm not from Texas. But you could say "they," meaning one person, and especially if you're in a very agitated state, if you're hysterical, and if you're injured. But he kept saying, "They've got her, they've got her." The family remembers opening the door and seeing Rodney with some blood on his face. Now, there's different versions. Carla's older sister Cindy says, in one interview, blood's pouring out of Rodney's head. And then in the interviews with Paul Holes, she said he had blood on his face. I mean, it wasn't pouring. So I don't know if it's time has changed people's statements, because we find Rodney's statement has changed too. And with Rodney being really the only living witness, unless there's other people who know, which law enforcement believes there are definitely more people alive who know, we have to go by his statements. So his original statement was that the offender was around 20, medium height, 5'8" to 5'10", medium build, 160 to 180, had on an off-white cowboy hat and a green, shiny, sleeveless vest. Now, that seems odd to me in 1974, but maybe that's how people dressed in Texas, in Fort Worth, Texas in 1974. The hat, that sounds, I get that. The green, shiny, sleeveless vest. Yeah, I'm not really sure I get that, but that's what he said. Now, that's real particular. That's very, very specific. In his interview with Paul Holes, he seemed to have not remembered the cowboy hat. And they made no mention of the shiny green vest, but there was a lot of other details left out, so perhaps that was just left on the editing room floor. But Paul Holes had a bit of an issue with the fact that Rodney did not remember the hat.
There's something else here. I'm sorry.
No, please.
Okay, there's two things. There's something new I just learned that I wasn't paying attention to before that you just said. One of the things, the thing I just learned is that originally he said, quote, "They've got her," right?
Yes.
Okay.
Over and over.
I didn't know that, or I wasn't paying attention to that before.
No, I didn't tell you. That
yeah.
wasn't in what we watched last night,
Okay.
and I don't tell you.
Right, okay, good. So I didn't know that
You
before.
didn't miss a thing.
But this bothered me when we watched the show last night, too, that she said, "Go get daddy. Mm-hmm. Go get daddy." Now, the way that sounds to me is, you know who these people are. Go get daddy. He'll put a stop to this. That, in other words, she at least thought that he knew who it was that was doing this, who this was. Now, maybe he misunderstood, but that phraseology, "Go get daddy." I mean, it just sounds like, why would she put it that way? And why didn't she go get help or
Go
something?
get the police.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, and now I'm learning that he said "they've got her," which indicates to me, at least you could interpret it, that he knew who they were as well. So I'm struggling with that. I'm sorry to throw this into the mix
No, I'm glad
here,
you did, and I'll tell you why.
Yeah. Okay.
I'll tell you why.
Please.
Tipster Tammy emailed me about a week ago and said, look, I want to tell you something else. No one thinks Rodney could have done this. And maybe Rodney didn't. But he ran around with a very rough crowd. And he had an altercation earlier in the day before the dance.
Really?
With some toughs, apparently maybe over some drugs. And
Really?
yeah, this is all speculation and rumors, but Tipster Tammy doesn't particularly, I think she's on the fence, and she is like all of us. We don't know if Rodney had anything to do with it, and she just wants all of the information to be known. It's an older cold case, and maybe Rodney will be completely exonerated.
Maybe. Here's the thing: he may not have been involved in it. He may know who they are, but he may have been scared then.
He may have blocked it out.
He may have just figured, I can't. They'll kill me if I
Absolutely.
tell. Who knows?
That is true,
and that could still be the people he's afraid of could still be alive now too.
Absolutely, and they probably are. Quite frankly, I know there's a few people that had been suspects who are no longer with us, but there's one main suspect who really, really could be. And I'm very hopeful that the fact that there's at least one unknown. There were 2 male DNA profiles, according to the DNA of murder, that were found on her dress. Now, to me, I don't want to be rude, but the fact that it was her older sister's dress, perhaps her older sister had a boyfriend at the time when she wore the dress to a dance, it doesn't necessarily mean that the DNA profiles that were still unknown are found on the dress were 2 men that kidnapped Carla. We know that male DNA can stay on clothing, lesson learned, fellas, can stay on clothing even after you wash it. So it's, it's going to be interesting to see who the DNA profiles belong to, if anyone. But there's one person I just feel like, it's just a shame that he hasn't been grilled more closely. So we'll get to him. So as we know, a woman, a beautiful young woman, early 20s, was kidnapped a year before beautiful Carla. 2 beautiful young girls in the area, sort of in the area. Fort Worth, apparently the Fort Worth Metroplex is huge. So Brenda Martin, I guess, was South Fort Worth. And I don't know where Benbrook Lake is. I'm not familiar with the geography, but that's where Carla was from. Apparently there's lots of places to hang out in Benbrook Lake. And that's, it was a nice upscale area, but it was also a place where you could find to hang and do drugs and, whatever kids do, whatever you young kids do. So they wait at Carla's home. Mr. Walker, Mrs. Walker calls the police. Mr. Walker goes to the bowling alley back with Rodney to look around the parking lot. The police show up about an hour and a half later. And that was a point of contention in the DNA of murder. But they respectfully put up a chyron that said other people's remembrance of the time made it a little more compressed. So he began to believe Rodney's explanation of the event a little more closely, because he was worried, why was there an hour and a half between the time that you're hit and you're out, but not for long, and it takes you an hour and a half to get 1 mile away back to Carla's house. Why he didn't call the police first, I always think that's odd. What producer Mark said makes just way too much sense right now, that maybe Rodney knew the people. Maybe he thought it was a situation they could handle themselves. He could get Carla's dad and maybe even get Carla's younger brother, Jim, to go with them. He was only 12 at the time. But honestly, the fact that this case is getting the attention it's getting now is because of Jim. Jim is a force to be reckoned with, which you'll hear a little bit about him personally later. He's kind of a badass. He's a really special human being in life now and in life when he was a youngster. So she was not his everything, but one of his best friends. And he, at the age of 12, sort of adored his 17-year-old sister, which I don't know. I'm an only child, so I don't know. That seems kind of rare, but it was a beautiful thing. He
really is.
It really is. He mentions in the DNA of murder that he sat for 6 hours in the culvert where Carla's body was eventually found to see what she went through, to see, smell, feel what happened. The coroner is not able to say if she was deceased when she was put in the culvert. There are so many rumors swirling around, and it's a good thing to try and dispel those things. There's rumors that she had been tortured. That isn't really, doesn't bear itself out in the autopsy. She had been raped and she had been strangled, and she had morphine in her system. Now, there's no mention in the autopsy if there's an injection site, which is the only way I thought morphine could be distributed. I had no idea that it could be, I guess, inhaled.
It can be inhaled, taken as a pill.
As a pill.
Yeah.
So a young man who had gone to the same high school, Western Hills High School, said that his father had purchased a Vietnam-era piece of equipment, and in it were med packs for field officers, field army surgeons. And there were ampules of morphine. And he had it in the backseat of his car at school a day or two before the Valentine's Day dance, and that some of them were missing. Don't know if they would have made their way to Rodney or to Carla, or if that is even, at all. Because one of the first questions I had was if they had something to drink and smoke some pot, that's one thing. But in 1974, is morphine a big deal? But apparently, or easy to get in high school?
No. But I can see how it could happen that, accidentally somebody left it in this article that this kid's dad purchased, and that there were some Army medical packets that had these ampules in it that accidentally got left in there, and from what they said on the Paul Holes show was that all of them were missing, that they got stolen out of this kid's car, and they think that the drug dealers got a hold of them.
Right.
So that maybe the drug dealers were selling these morphine ampules at school, but I don't know.
It's a lot to try and piece together. And since I'm just never sure who's really telling the truth, or let me just say this, the whole truth. I think there's a lot of truth in the statements from the people involved. I just don't know that we're getting all of the truth. So another thing that was cleared up for me was, how was Carla found so quickly? If Brenda Martin was found a month after she disappeared in a culvert, how was Carla Walker found 3 days later? And it's explained because they felt what happened to Brenda Martin wasn't a one-time thing, that someone who did this either had done it before or would do it again. They started looking immediately in culverts, and they found her. It's not an easy culvert. It was surrounded by barbed wire. There were many other places he could have put her that he would have driven to before this particular culvert. It's thought that maybe he knew the area, probably knew the area, and put her there. But she was found relatively quickly, which every minute counts in a case like this. And the fact that she was found so quickly is probably the only reason we have what we have now, which sounds like a lot of evidence. And yet, all these years later, it feels like kind of like nothing, because it just keeps coming up against brick wall after brick wall after brick wall. So Rodney was ruled out for the most part. He was questioned many, many times. Every investigator who questioned him felt he was as honest as he could be, that he, was remembering what happened to the best of his ability, that he, was not going to bend or fall or change his story. And his story has changed somewhat in that details may not be remembered. But for the most part, 45 years later, a traumatic incident, if it happened the way he said, this is what could have happened. I think Tipster Tammy is trying to say that if it isn't Rodney, it may have been people who Rodney knew. And like what producer Mark said, that I really didn't catch that, they've got her, could mean we know who this is and we can take care of this internally, but it didn't turn out that way. And a few other things that in the DNA of murder, Paul Holes said that Carla's body had been slightly covered. He also was very clear at the end, speaking to the detectives who are looking at the case now, that it's a tough one, that he comes down on both sides. Carla's body was slightly covered. Her dress was ripped and torn. Her bra was still on. Her underwear was missing. Her purse is obviously back in the parking lot at the Brunswick bowling alley. And her lower body is covered by her ripped dress. She had been placed in the culvert and then drug back further, about midway through the culvert, to be more hidden, but then covered, which in most people's minds means that the person knew her or felt some remorse and wanted to cover her body. We've seen enough things, while I'm old school and still really hold on to the McDonald triad, no matter how hard people try to tell me it doesn't apply anymore, there are people who don't know someone and murder them and cover them up. It doesn't necessarily mean it's someone who knows you. There are people who have been stabbed 41 times and they're like, oh, this is overkill. This is definitely someone who knew them and it was a revenge killing. And it turns out to be a stranger who wanted your TV. So this case is even more puzzling, and Tipster Tammy warned me. She said lots of twists and turns, and boy, oh boy, is she right. So the family gets lots of tips sent to them, and they follow them up. And Carla's younger brother, Jim, says, we would have hired somebody who read tea leaves if we thought it would have helped. And he sees his parents recover to a certain extent, but not really. Not really. His parents never really got over it. And how could you? How could you ever get over it? In fact, Carla's father died exactly on the date that she went missing. He died February 16th of 1988 of a massive heart attack. It's heartbreaking.
Very, very, very sad.
It's heartbreaking. I mean, I don't feel like that's for nothing. I feel like that's a piece of information that means something. So before we get to the letter that I mentioned, we're going to get to a viable, in my opinion, suspect. And this was really bizarre and upsetting, and he's still alive. But about a year after Carla disappeared, a burglary detective, Detective Terrell, arrests a man in a series of burglaries. And when Detective Terrell pulls up in front of the man's house with another detective, so there's another witness, he's standing in his front yard. And Detective Terrell says, yeah, come over here. I want to talk to you. And the first thing he says is, I wondered when you were coming after me for Carla Walker.
Oh, yeah.
So William Ted Willhoit is arrested for burglary, and they recover a lot of stolen property in his house, and they take him back to jail to talk to him. Now, they don't say anything in the ride to jail about what he said. The first sentence he says is, I wondered when you were coming after me for Carla Walker. Now, was he just being flip? Like that's the most, publicized case in Fort Worth ever? And I mean, I have to tell you, the January 1975 Fort Worth Star-Telegram said that the most covered case in 1974 was the headline, Carla Walker found dead. And there was a panel of 15 Star-Telegram editors who picked that case as the biggest news story for 1974. And they made their selection from 29 stories. And there was a possible 150 points, and Carla Walker found dead received 135 points. And it came in first. The only closest second was 106 points for the story about the opening of the Dallas-Fort Worth airport. So it was the biggest story of 1974. So was Ted Willhoit being flip? It sounds like he could have been.
Could have been.
But there's a few pieces of information that make it a little more of an important piece for me. He was a youth counselor at a Church of Christ. He drove the church bus. He would spout a lot of Bible verses. And that was sort of known. So when Detective Terrell takes him back to the station to question him about the burglaries, about all the stolen goods they found, he kind of throws in, what you said about Carla. She came from a really good family. And Detective Terrell said he sort of began to chip away at his conscience. I said, if you know something about what happened, you're not going to be able to live with yourself. You just might as well tell me. And Ted Willhoit begins to sob. And he's crying heavily. And he says, well, I guess I may as well tell you. And at that moment, there's a pound on the interview room door from a federal marshal who wants to talk about the things that were found at Willhoit's home and about the warrant that they served on him. And by the time that Detective Terrell gets back to the interview room, Willhoit has pulled himself together and said, I'm done.
Wow. Okay. You would think that the detective would have told the marshal, hold off a second, I'll be right out.
I would have, everything is much better in hindsight, right?
Of course, but wow.
The other thing was what the marshal needed to talk to Detective Terrell about was that they had found where he had pawned Rugers. And a Ruger is what was used to hit Rodney McCoy, and the magazine was found in the parking lot.
Right.
So he's arrested. A really odd thing happens is that a employee of the Brunswick Ridgely Bowl picked out Willhoit's picture from a lineup and said, and maybe she got this from the news, I'm going to pray she didn't. She remembered him being at the bowling alley that night, and she remembered him wearing a hat and a green vest.
Well, okay.
I'm hoping that wasn't released to the press beforehand, but I don't know. Everything I can find is after the fact. So in 1976, Detective Terrell goes to interview Willhoit in prison, and he tries the same thing. You're a good Christian man. You were a youth counselor at a Church of Christ. You drove the church bus. And Willhoit stops him and said, you almost got me with that last time, but I've learned some things since then.
Oh, okay.
End of interview.
Well, yeah. Okay.
Right. So I don't know if the DNA on the dress is from who attacked Carla, or, who knows? I don't want to say where it could come from because I think there's other options. But I can tell you that a letter that was received by the Fort Worth police right after Carla was found was not mentioned in the DNA of murder, and I think it's pretty huge.
Do you?
I do.
I'm flabbergasted.
So this letter was received, and they held it back. And I get it. I get, as a detective, how you need to hold information back so that you can have people who, don't confess and get, indicted, which happened to a young man who ended up, it's a false confession, and he was, he was mentally ill and was upset about a breakup with his girlfriend. He spent 8 months in jail and then was released. So this letter was held back and not made public until April or May of 2019. And, a case goes cold and heats up and goes cold and heats up. And 45 years later, I'm angry, and I guess they had their reasons, but I'm angry that this letter just came out last year. It's handwritten. If it had been released, 43 years ago, perhaps someone could have recognized the writing. It's crudely handwritten. It's a little difficult to read, but when you figure it out, you can read it. You can read this person's handwriting. It's a little bit loopy. It's not flourishy, but there are some. To me, it looks like it's probably written by a man and by an older man, not a younger man. I mean, I'm not a handwriting expert at all, but it says Detective Lieutenant Ball, City Hall, Fort Worth, Texas. A large black bar redacting either a name or a description of the person. Killed Carla Walker in Benbrook. Now it's Killd, so it's a misspelling. And then it says sign 10100. And then it says P.S. It's hard to say, but it's true. And below that it says sign 10100. Now, sign 10100 to me could have been like a mile marker where the culvert where she was found. My grandfather was a truck driver. A 10100 is CB lingo for I'm going to the bathroom. Apparently, in 1974, all jurisdictions of law enforcement have their own codes. In California, 187 is code for a homicide. At the time, code 10100 meant a dead body. A person's been killed.
In that particular jurisdiction?
Yep.
Yeah.
So was it someone who knew the police codes? Were they naming someone who was in law enforcement? Who's to say? Because the name is redacted. I would be fascinated, all of us would, to know what that name is. I don't think it's Rodney's name, but who knows? Because I think he would have been the first person everyone thought of, and this person is like, it's sad to say, but it's true. And they believe that this person, while maybe not still alive, has information, knows something, knew something. If someone knows who wrote it and that person's not still alive, we'll give you the number for the Fort Worth police, and please call and let them know. You can call anonymously. It's, if you know anything, we'll get to that. But I want you to know what Carla's family is like. So her father dies of a massive heart attack 14 years after she disappears. And her mother and father worked until their passing, and to never know what really happened to their daughter and who and why. And her brother had wanted, Jim Walker, had wanted to be a police officer. And he goes to the academy and he passes, and he's, smart and obviously motivated. And he notices that his eyesight is sort of going away faster than he knows how to explain. So he didn't want to become a liability to the department, so he walked away. But he wanted to become a police officer.
Wow, I didn't know that. Wow.
But it actually gets even better. He is an amazing man, and he is now legally blind. He is a disability counselor, And last year, he and his wife and his service dog, Cassie, were out for a walk. And there are 2 police officers, and he sees a struggle break out with 2 suspects. And he helps disarm a suspect, a legally blind man, disarms a suspect. He holds the suspect down while the officers secured his gun and were able to take the 2 suspects into custody. And Officer Woolbright said, "I didn't know he was there until he was right there and he was climbing on top of the suspect."
That's an amazing story.
An amazing story that he helps 2 officers with armed suspects and he's legally blind. And what is the first thing he says when they interview him? He holds up a picture of his sister and he says, "We're not going away."
Jeez.
They come to interview him because he's a fucking local hero. And he says, "Here's my sister. Her case is unsolved and we're not going away."
That's just incredible.
Yeah. It's a little bit overwhelming that he is who he is. So back to Ted Willhoit, who is quoting the Bible and crying and saying, "I should tell you, but I've learned some things now, so I'm not going to do that." And they could never quite get back to where he was in his quote-unquote confession. He is released from prison from the burglary, and he is considered a suspect by Detective Terrell in Fort Worth for a lot of things that he probably is not going to get credit for. But Detective Terrell won't get off of his butt. And everywhere he moves, he notifies law enforcement. So Ted Willhoit moves to Abilene, and Detective Terrell says, "Hey, you got a real awesome guy there who I believe rapes and kills women. And he's living in Abilene, and keep an eye on him." And a short time later, an Abilene housewife is raped by an intruder. And the police take Terrell's tip seriously, and they're able to connect him. He is convicted of the rape and the robbery and is sentenced to 40 years in prison, which, as we know, doesn't always mean 40 years in prison. In 1986, he is questioned in prison about the attempted murder of Janelle Kirby, who was shot 5 times in the face in 1974, but survived. He's granted immunity, and he confesses. The only reason he was granted immunity is because he cleared another man who had been convicted of the crime. He shot a woman 5 times in the face, and she survives.
Man.
And he does no time for that. He's paroled in 1992 after serving time for the Abilene rape, and he relocates to Corpus Christi. But Detective Terrell is just not fucking letting go. God bless him. Even though he's passed away, he was a fucking bulldog. And he lets the Corpus Christi police know, "Hey, you got an asshole there." And March 25th of 1995, police, acting on Terrell's tip, discover him crawling out of a window where a single woman lived.
Oh.
He admitted the burglary, his parole's revoked, and he returns to prison. He's paroled again in 2003. And he is a registered sex offender. He's 65, and he lives in Robstown, Texas. And I keep looking him up, and he has to register every August, which is his birth date. He was born in 1952 or 53, and he has to register as a sex offender every year on his birth date, which, you know, doesn't make me sad. Doesn't make me sad that he has to register as a sex offender.
Yeah, my heart's broken. Yeah.
I think there's a lot more that William Ted Willhoit did that we won't know, but his last picture from August of 2019 For the last 10 years, when he registers as a sex offender in whatever city he's living in, he smiles in his pictures. And he sadly looks like an average guy you would see at your church.
That's what's so creepy.
With thinning hair and glasses and a smirky smile on his face as he's registering as a sex offender. Probably because he knows he's done a lot worse than that. I mean, there isn't much worse than being a sex offender, but murder, is right up there. So I'm still going to hold out that some results come back that say it wasn't Rodney, but I don't know. I would love for it to be Ted Willhoit, but I don't know. If you know any information about the anonymous letter just released last year, and we will post a photo of it in all of our social media where you can see the podcast. It's an interesting letter, and maybe there'll be something that jogs your memory. Maybe you were a little kid at the time. Maybe there were rumors in your family that you know or knew someone who wrote this letter, and the information's correct. Even the redacted part that we can't see, that law enforcement knows who was named.
Maybe you'll recognize the handwriting.
Right? Maybe you'll recognize the handwriting. There's something. Maybe you'll recognize the numbers, the lingo, the 10-100. Maybe something. If you know anything, if you have a theory about anything, it doesn't matter if you think it may not be right. Please call the Fort Worth police. They are really asking for anyone who knows anything to please call 817-392-4307 and more cowbell.
If you'd like to support the podcast, go to patreon.com/just the Tip-Sters.